All right, regrouping. Gonna pull the transmission and drill out all those broken bolts. So, first things first, pull out the drive shaft, and that is starting out with the 4 bolts in the back, and then pop that yoke off the diff. Come to the center here, 2 bolts there, and then the slip yoke out of the rear of the transmission. So while it's out, I'm going to replace that rear main seal as well, and we'll go from there. Sucks to have to pull trans, but it is what it is. Now what's awesome is that I don't have to drop the exhaust, because I was not looking forward to touching this exhaust, at least until I'm ready to replace it, because it is a little ragged. But that's a project for another day. I'm already in it to win it for the transmission, so one thing at a time. So after I get the drive shaft out, then we'll move on and go over everything up there. Alright, so these are 14mm heads. If you've got your vehicle in neutral, you should be able to spin this. I got it in park. That's so I can break it loose. And if you put it in neutral, you just have to make sure you put it in park or engage the parking brake to break them loose. But we'll see how tight these guys really are. Now, double flex head, this is not ideal, but we'll see. All right, not too bad. That's the ratchet. Get the other side. And the bottom 2, you can actually get a straight socket on, or a straight socket and an extension. These top 2 though. Ooh. Oh, that was my thumb. Okay, we're good. Alrighty. This is where you can take a rubber mallet if it doesn't. You can smack this around a little bit, and if it doesn't pop off, or you can get in here with a flat head and give it a little scooch. Even persuade it to come off. Got some washers to get off there. Make sure don't forget about those. Alrighty, so these are 2 14s. Even though I got my impact driver, I always prefer to try to break this stuff loose with the hand tools, at least for the first time taking something apart like this, unless you're confident that you're not going to have any issues like strip threads or anything. These all feel really good. Switch over to the impact. Alright, so I got one out. The other one's holding this up, and that's the rubber joint in there that takes away some vibration isolation. So as soon as I take this bolt out, it's going to want to kink, and then it'll either pop off the back or the front will want to start sliding out. So this is a little bit heavier than a Supra drive shaft, but they have the same 2-piece design. I'm gonna hold it up. Got the bolt. Alright, now this is where you gotta be a little bit careful, because it's easy to get your head, knock yourself in the head if the diff side pops off first and you're not ready for it. So I'm just putting my foot underneath the drive shaft, give it a few taps. It doesn't seem like it wants to move. I'm already hitting the exhaust, so I'll probably just chill there for a second while I grab a screwdriver and go back to the diff and go ahead and give her a little persuasion come off. Let's see what you can see. Yeah, okay. That's a bit tighter on there than I was expecting. So I'm going to get a bigger screwdriver. Alright, I got this beast. So, I applied a little bit of heat with a torch. I mean, like, I just did it and it's not hot to the touch, just warm, just to warm it up. And I gave it a few more hits with the hammer, and then I took my large screwdriver and just put it right here in that corner there. Give it a few whacks, here, and then I noticed just the slightest little bit of lift on that side, so I got my smallest little screwdriver, little guy, real little guy, and made a little headway there, went to the other side with a slightly larger screwdriver, and then the little one fell out, and I hit a few more times and popped. There it goes. I also put one of the nuts back just in case it went popping off a little violently, but nope. Pretty chill. Alrighty, so now that that's done, I can sit you down and we'll move on to we'll slide this drive shaft out and then jump over to the front of the transmission and look at what we got to take apart up there. Oop. Disturb all the hardware. Okay. And that can live there for a little bit. Alright, now that the drive shaft is out, we'll look at all the other little stuff we got to take off. So we got the shifter linkage, shifter cable, 2 bolts there, and then right here on the other side there's a little clip, and those come off real easy. It looks like this one is going to come off on the top, and then this cable will, or this linkage part will actually pop off, and then it's always a good idea to put that little clip right back into the peg that it comes out of. Those are tough to lose, or easy to lose, tough to find. And then the harness. So up there, let's see. That's our harness that comes down. And it's mounted to the top of the transmission. Right there. And right there. It looks like those bolts come in from the top underneath the harness, so you can't really get to them, and there should be a little relief on top of that that gray clip that's holding it that you can use a small screwdriver or maybe even with your finger and release it and slide it off the little metal angle mount. Looks like we've got a speed sensor there. That little black connector, and then we've got the connector for the shift solenoids that we already took off, O2 sensor. Flip over to the other side now. Alright, on this side of the transmission, looks like we've got O2 sensor, just behind that, speed sensor, the neutral safety switch, and tells you which gear you're in on the dash. That's what that guy is. And then up front right there, there's another O2 sensor connector that actually goes up to the manifold. That's one of the primary ones. And then finally, transmission lines. Those look rather rusty. I'm definitely going to be utilizing the torch and some kind of penetrating oil to break those free, because I do not want to have to replace them. And then after that, the only thing that we've got to do is unbolt the torque converter, and we can get access through a small access opening on the bottom of the bell housing on the front. I'll show that later. A bit more effective. Okay. Yeah, there's our little clip. And now there should be a washer. And then this guy should, in theory, slide off. Ooh, okay, so that cable's in the way of the bottom bolt with a long deep socket. Swap that out for our shorty. That bolt was not too tight, so that's good. Alright. Just enough room. Alright, now I'm going to switch over to a wrench for that guy. Nice and easy. Alrighty, she's free. And now, this guy, yep, that's what it needed. A little bit of leverage. Set this off to the side up on the truck and move on to the connectors here. This style, you push down the tang in the middle there, the big one, and then give it a little wiggle while you pull. Try not to pull on the wires. You just want to pull on the housing. Sometimes you can't help it and you have to pull on the wires, but you run that risk of damaging or pulling out the wires. Alright, so I just reached up and used my finger on the top of this guy right here and was able to pull it towards the outside and start lifting on the harness, and then that disengages that clip and lets me push the harness off the mounting tab there. So I'm going to try to do the same thing for the one up front, and then undo all the other connectors here. Now these O2 sensor connectors are notorious for being a pain in the ass to take apart. They're just a really tight tolerance. At least on the older early 90s stuff that have this style of O2 sensor connector. I'm gonna go ahead and pop all these connectors off and then move on to those rusty transmission lines. Come back. Alright, for these guys, I don't think I'm going to be able to get a good camera angle to show the process, but I'll explain it. It's a heat, soak, heat, soak, heat, soak process. So the spray penetrating oil on the threads, and then come in with a torch and heat until all of the penetrating oil turns to like a fizzy, poppy, it starts essentially evaporating. And then hit it again with penetrating oil, bring the heat back, and at that point it probably will ignite and you'll have some flame, so just be careful if you do this. And then again, just keep going until basically it dries out. Penetrating oil again, do that a few times, and by, you know, ideally the penetrating oil works its way through, the heat loosens everything up. All right, first one's broke loose pretty quickly. I did 4 heat soak cycles, and then started applying some pressure with the wrench. It's a 19 on the transmission side and a 17 on the line side. And as soon as as soon as I broke it loose, it felt a little tight. So then I hit it with more penetrating oil, but it was still too hot, so it pretty much evaporated. Kept moving it back and forth a little bit, and then started just going out, and then hit it with a little bit more penetrating oil, and then it's where it's at now, where the line's going to start draining. Success. Did the 3 heat cycles on the top fitting, and it broke free. It actually felt a little bit cleaner than the bottom one. It looked worse, but that's a good thing. Alright, so I undid the clamp on the transmission right there, and there's another one up on the block right next to it. That one I undid the bolt, but the clamp did not come off, so I've got to get up there and pry it. And there might be another one on the block up front. Hopefully just these 2 will give enough movement to be able to slide these fittings out. If not, I mean, the transmission's got to come back towards the back of the truck anyway when it comes out, so those fittings should just kind of slide apart from the transmission. Alright, on to the next thing, which is torque converter. Let's see if we can get an image of that. I might have to take the skid plate off to get to the crank, so we can turn the crank to get to all the torque converter bolts. We'll see. Just a moment. I just got the truck up on some little ramps to help access up here. So that is the little access port to get to the torque converter bolts. It's kind of weird though. Usually there's 2 bolts on these guys, and just 1 on this one. So that's a pretty easy thing. Pop that off, this cover comes off, and then we'll see inside to the torque converter. Alright, so it actually felt really tight, so I came around from the back, and it looked like mud daubers or something, or just insects, or who knows, just normal road grime. Got in the back of the hole, so I took a pick, cleaned it out as much as I could, sprayed penetrating oil inside of it, heated this whole area up, and then did the back and forth, and it came out. But it did feel very tight at the beginning, and I didn't want to break another bolt. But here's the reveal, and there is 1 torque converter bolt right off to the side there. So now, since I can't actually turn the engine like from back here, I'm gonna have to pop off the skid plate up front, the one you typically take off to do an oil change, and then access the crank pulley so you can turn it. Alright, so now that the skid plate's off, it's 22 millimeter. Just come up here and then give the engine a rotation until you can expose the bolt there, and then break the bolt loose, take it out, move on to the next. So 6 bolts on the torque converter. Now let's see, it is free. Well, move the, yeah, let's see. Okay, now torque converter is free. It's actually pushed into the transmission a little bit, so it'll stay with the transmission on the way out. You want to pull the torque converter with the transmission so you don't damage the input shaft seal of the pump. And before you go any further, don't be like me and forget. Take that wrench off the crank right away, because if this stayed on, There's a lot of junk up here that'll get tore right up. Bell housing bolts. This is a 17, that's 14. There's 6 of these 17s. There, and then you can't see it, but it's really close to the top. And then there are 4 of these 14mm heads on the bottom here. Alright, time for plan B. This bolt right here, if I put too much pressure on it, it's going to break. And I used the torch, heated this area a lot, tried to soak it. I was able to break it loose about 1 mil, maybe 2 mils, and then get some penetrating oil inside, but it just is every time I got to that about 2 mil, it would just tighten up. The rest of them broke free. So plan B is taking out this guy. I got to the point right here where the transmission did drop a little bit, so I think there is plenty of slack in the system to allow angle of transmission to get to those top 2 bolts. But we'll find out for sure here shortly. I'm going to go ahead and get the oil pan back on so I have a jack point, and then pop this bolt out, get the cross member out of the way. Alright, cross member is out. Took some persuasion to get it out, but it came out. So transmission jack is underneath of it. I'll go ahead and try to lower this. Got the ratchet on there. Go ahead and sit this camera down. And right there is release. So let's see if I try to get a view. I can see both of those 17 mils up top. So because these are just normal extensions, we're going to lose a lot of torque. They'll actually start to twist. Alright, cool. Positive engagement there. I'm pushing up against the floor of the cab. Oh! All right. Got it. Broke it loose. That took a bit of force, and you just felt the brunt of it. Alright guys, finally got the transmission out. It was a nightmare to pull this thing. The 2 dowels here, they were completely seized into the bell housing. As you can see, that's that white stuff. That's corrosion and galling from the dissimilar metals getting moisture in them. And they actually pulled out of the block versus pulling out of the bell housing like they're supposed to. It was, like I said, it was a nightmare trying to get this thing out. I wasn't able to record any of it because it was just moving around the truck, underneath the truck too much, and I actually had a second set of hands come in and help me out with it. But essentially what I was doing was with, it's upside down now, but in the truck I had my transmission jack with the oil pan on, and I would up and down, and we worked it enough that a small gap formed on the bottom between the oil pan, the upper oil pan, and the bell housing, and we were able to take a really small pocket screwdriver and drive it in with a hammer onto one side and then another one on the other side, and then lift the transmission back up, essentially working it off of these pins. We thought we were coming off the pins, but in fact we were pulling the pins out of the block, and then raising the transmission back up, tapping those screwdrivers a little bit more, to the point where we get a slightly thicker screwdriver in, and we just basically worked it. Lowered the transmission, lifted it back up, tapped them in a little bit farther, and finally we were able to get a pry bar on the passenger side. There's a real small spot on the block that has a little nub, or maybe it's the upper oil pan. It has a little nub that you can get a pry bar behind it. We were just able to get something in, the large pry bar in there, and pry that apart. And then we moved to the other side, just went straight up with a flathead screwdriver and worked it in, little by little, until we were able to get the pry bar on that side, and then it was able to pop out. So that's just the update on pulling this thing. Like I said, it was a bear, but now we're on to the fun stuff. I bought some extra parts. I got a case of the might as wells, so let's go over those real quick.